Safe for now. The British Prime Minister survives a vote of no confidence, but are his days in Downing Street numbered? I'm Adnan Nawaz, and today's newsmaker is Boris Johnson. In the past 300 years, the UK has had almost 60 prime ministers. Boris Johnson is the only one to have broken the law while in office. Fined by police 2 months ago for flouting a coronavirus lockdown, he himself had imposed on the country. An independent investigation into repeated breaches at his official residence has highlighted a lack of judgement and a failure of leadership at the very top of government. Johnson has never been one to play by the rules, although his most important job, that may be winning votes. On that, he certainly delivers. Morals and ethics don't always sit easily in the world of politics, but on Monday evening in London, after enough of his own MPs triggered a vote of no confidence, 41% of them cast ballots to remove him. It wasn't enough. Mohammed Walji reports on the great escape.
Therefore, I can announce that the Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
His supporters may have been cheering, but make no mistake, Monday night was not good for the British Prime Minister. 148 of his own Conservative MPs say they don't have confidence in him. That's more than 40%. Not enough to oust him, but maybe enough to undermine his leadership. The Prime Minister, however, argues the vote went well. He says the government can now move on and focus on issues that concern the public.
I think it's a convincing result, a decisive result, and what it means is that as a government we can move on and focus on the stuff that I think really matters to people.
When Boris Johnson replaced Theresa May in 2019, he did so with significant support. Within months, he led the Tories to their biggest election win in decades. It was all going so well for the former London mayor, a massive parliamentary majority and a pretty decent approval rating to match. Fast forward 3 years, and Johnson is facing the biggest fight of his political life. Throughout his time in Downing Street, the Prime Minister has never been too far from controversy. Most of the time he walks away relatively unscathed, but Partygate is just one scandal he can't shake. Sue Gray's report into illegal lockdown parties in Downing Street and Whitehall was damning for Johnson's government. The senior civil servant looked into 16 events and found officials had repeatedly breached COVID rules. She also highlighted excessive drinking and the abuse of security and cleaning staff. The Prime Minister resisted calls to resign, but did offer this apology.
I am confident with the changes and new structures that are now in place, that we are humbled by the experience, and we have learned our lesson. And I want to conclude by saying that Mr. Speaker, I am humbled and I have learned a lesson, Mr. Speaker.
But for many of Johnson's own MPs, an apology just won't cut it. Some say they're tired of defending the indefensible.
I made my point and my position very clear to the Prime Minister. He does not have my support. But a question I humbly put to my colleagues is, are you willing, day in and day out, to defend this behaviour publicly? Can we continue to govern without distraction, given the erosion of the trust with the British people? And can we win the general election on this current trajectory?
And it's not just politicians who are furious, so too is the public. A recent YouGov poll found almost 70% of people asked believe the Prime Minister was doing a bad job. And if that wasn't enough, as he arrived for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee concert, Boris Johnson was booed. The Prime Minister and his supporters are trying to put a positive spin on Monday's confidence vote. Downing Street says it's renewed the PM's mandate, but if history's anything to go by, leadership challenges rarely end well. In 1990, more than 40% of Margaret Thatcher's MPs called for her to quit. A week later, they got their wish. Theresa May suffered a similar fate in 2018. 37% voted for her to step down. Within months, she resigned. Boris Johnson will hope for a different outcome. He's vowed to unite his party. But if he can't, will he be forced to walk away? Mohammed Walji, The Newsmakers.
Well, our guests today are all in London, so let's introduce them to you. Calvin Robinson is a journalist and political commentator. We have Patrick Diamond, who's the author of the British Labour Party in Opposition and Power. He was also an advisor to the Labour government between 2000 and 2010. Completing our panel is Chris Roebuck, who's a visiting professor of transformational leadership at Bayes Business School. Gentlemen, welcome to the Newsmakers. Patrick, I thought I'd start with you because I think possibly Calvin, as a Conservative Party supporter, will think that this is a good result for Boris Johnson. But Patrick, I'm thinking, for example, OK, I'm 18 years old, I'm taking my A-levels, which for international viewers means I'm trying to get into university. If I got 59%, I wouldn't get into a particularly good university. I'm thinking I'm not happy with 59%.
Well, indeed, and the problem with the result for the Prime Minister is it just underlines the strength of discontent within the Conservative Party towards his leadership. When you look at the MPs who were, as it were, able to vote according to their conscience rather than being bound by being paid ministerial salaries, the so-called payroll vote, 75% of Conservative backbenchers voted against Boris Johnson. So his real difficulty is just the strength of feeling against him in the Parliamentary Conservative Party.
Calvin, 59%, he survives, but is he damaged?
Yes, indeed. So never assume. I don't think this is a good result for Boris Johnson at all. I don't think it's good that his own party called a vote of no confidence in him. I don't think it's good that he won by a slim majority. I think at this point he is limping on, and I don't think he'll make it to the next general election.
Interesting. I was going to end with that kind of prediction from you, but you've begun with it. So thanks very much, Calvin. Chris, we'll come on to your particular area of expertise about Boris Johnson as a leader and how effective he is in a little while. But first of all, do you think that this was a one-vote issue, that the MPs would have voted simply on the scandals during the coronavirus lockdown, or might there have been other considerations that they were thinking about?
I think it's like any situation where, you know, we have a leader, whether that's within politics or whether that's at work. What we do is we look at what's been going on, and a number of events start to create a pattern. And based on that pattern, we draw conclusions. And whilst this last incident was a pretty big blow-up, and within the commercial world, effectively pretty much being cast as someone who has little or no integrity and has a difficult relationship with the truth is bad enough. But when you add some of the previous incidents, it doesn't look good, just from the perspective of MPs. But don't forget that the British public is looking at this as well, and he was booed over the weekend.
Yeah, he was, as he was entering a service to mark the Platinum Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth, of course. Chris, do you think that there's a lack of viable alternatives to Boris Johnson? Do you see anybody in the Conservative Party who could become the leader of the country?
Not at this point in time. And that's always the challenge. You know, if you have a leader and they are not up to what you expect, of course, you need to have an alternative. And the problem then is, not just in politics, in any team, you have to bide your time until you find a replacement. So whether that is going to happen in terms of the time between now and potentially the next election, we will see. But going to the core of it, you know, the country is not happy with Boris. And the vote showed that there are a percentage of the Conservative MPs who, to a degree you could interpret, were voting on principle. We cannot have somebody in charge who doesn't have that much integrity and has difficulty with the truth. Then on the other end of the spectrum, we have the pragmatists, which goes to your point. Well, OK, yes, but who are you going to replace him with? OK,
let's look at probably two of Boris Johnson's biggest challenges. Obviously, the coronavirus pandemic and also delivering Brexit and the exit of the United Kingdom from the European Union. Calvin, in terms of his behaviour during the pandemic, We repeatedly saw him in the UK standing at the podium in Downing Street, telling people to stay home to save lives. And he imposed these rules on the country, and he told Parliament that he believed that all of those gatherings were within the rules and that they were working events. At one point, Theresa May, his predecessor in Parliament, basically, and let me paraphrase, she said to him, Mr. Prime Minister, are you too stupid to understand your own rules, or did you actually know what the rules were and didn't care to follow them? That was a terrible moment for Boris Johnson.
Indeed, this is the bigger issue for me, in that if these rules were so life and death, if these rules which took away our civil liberties were there to prevent us from dying, why did the people making the rules not consider them serious enough to follow them? This should have been the reason for people to call out Boris Johnson, not over whether he had a party or not whether he had a cake or not whether he knew that it was a party or it was a work event. This is all nonsense. And the suggestion that people are questioning Boris Johnson's integrity or his lack of ability to stick to the truth, I find that absurd, because people did not vote for Boris Johnson thinking he was a politician of integrity. People voted for him thinking he would get the job done on Brexit. And for people like Chris to stand there and say the country does not support Boris Johnson, I find that outstanding, because we just look at the polls. Look at what happened in the local elections. The Tories won in Westminster. The Tories won more seats in Brent. The Tories are winning seats in key areas. Yes, they're also losing them in the metropolitan Liberal elite areas, but the Tories are still doing quite well. And it's the polls on election day that matter. I think that the British people are actually fed up with Portugal. The British people don't care about it as much as the metropolitan Liberal elites in Westminster and in the media do.
Patrick, would you agree? I mean, many people thought that he got his COVID strategy wrong from the very start.
Well, I think there's a general agreement that the government was very uncertain at the beginning of the COVID outbreak. And I mean, going back to the core question of leadership, the question is, what quality of leadership is the government providing in terms of the clarity of the messages and the policies that it's putting forward? Now, of course, there's been a lot of focus on breaking lockdown rules, which is understandable in terms of the ethics of government. But I think when the inquiry, which has been called reports on the government's general handling of the COVID outbreak, there'll be a lot of questions to answer. Of course, the vaccine rollout was successful, but in lots of other areas, the management of the social care system, the state of the National Health Service, the coordination of the government's response to COVID. The fact is the Johnson administration does, as I say, have many questions to answer about its competence.
Chris, it's absolutely correct that the UK had one of the quickest rollouts of vaccines anywhere in the world. That may have saved Boris Johnson's reputation during the course of the worst moments of the pandemic. But there were times when, again, he was speaking to the country and he was asking them to use their common sense. And in the rest of the world, wherever that was happening, there were problems with COVID-19. Surely, at a moment like that, in the history of any country, you want decisive leadership rather than a prime minister or a president telling you, hey, use your common sense. This is a bit dangerous.
Yeah, I think the point in terms of, regarding political leadership, I think the British public accepts that political leadership often includes an element perhaps of bad behaviour and are therefore more tolerant of that than they might be elsewhere. But there comes a point when the level of lack of integrity, failure to tell the truth, gets to the point where most people are beginning to say, actually, enough is enough. And you talk about COVID, so yeah, Boris did a good job in COVID. But also, if we go back to the speech in COVID by Her Majesty the Queen saying we all need to stick together, we all need to stick to the rules, we all need to set an example as previous generations did, and then her own Prime Minister goes and breaks the rules that he's put in place. And we see the picture of Her Majesty the Queen sitting at the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, sticking to the rules all by herself, when the night before there was a party in Downing Street. That is intensely personal for the British people generally, let alone those people who couldn't say goodbye to their dying relatives because of the COVID rules. It's fundamentally about hypocrisy. And whatever he did before in terms of bad behaviour, hypocrisy and do as I say, not what as I do, takes this up to a different level.
Absolutely. Listen, I really, really want to get into how his character is perceived, how it's been perceived in the past and what it is like now. But I also want to address this other big issue, because Boris Johnson is the Prime Minister who has delivered Brexit. That referendum, however close, it voted for the UK to leave the European Union. Chris, do you think that he may have passed his sell-by date in terms of Conservative MPs thinking, look, Brexit is done now, Boris's time is going, and we need to have another leader before the next general election?
In all of these sort of situations with organisations, you get people who are voting and acting on the basis of we, not me, I'm here for the greater good, we want to make everything work well as a group. And then you get people who are working on the basis of me and not we, because as far as I'm concerned, what matters is me and my job. Within the Conservative MP group, there is a spread of those, as we saw last night. So what is going to happen over the next few months is that they are all going to be looking at what is going on and saying to themselves, as we get closer to decision day, is he a liability or is he an asset? And depending on which is which, we know that in terms of disposing of leaders, the Tory party can probably move faster than anybody.
Patrick, do you think that Boris Johnson is ignoring the realities of Brexit? I'm trying to rack my brains and think of one negative issue that he has said is the result of Brexit. It seems to me as if, look, clearly, as the man who delivered the end result, he wants to put a positive spin on it. But wouldn't it be more realistic to say, yes, we have the challenges, and no, it's not just down to the coronavirus pandemic? Because if you look at all the other major industrialized countries in the world, their economies have recovered far more quickly than the UK's has.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. He's misjudged the narrative. I think Boris Johnson's concern about making the case for why Brexit's the right policy has led him to assert time and time again that Brexit is working and that it's a successful policy shift by the UK. The truth is, and everyone can see it in the economic data, whether you agree with Brexit or not, and there are of course arguments on both sides, it clearly is creating problems for the UK economy. It's creating problems for trade, it's creating friction, it's having a big impact on inward investment. There were some numbers out today showing that in fact London is doing relatively well compared to the rest of the UK, but the north of England and the Midlands that were supposed to be helped by Brexit are actually doing very poorly indeed economically. So I think for the Prime Minister, it would be more sensible to have a narrative that talked about the challenges ahead, the difficulties that Brexit was likely to impose, rather than having this very unrealistic Panglossian view that somehow Brexit is all wonderful. It clearly isn't. And I think part of the political problem he's facing is that there is now a stronger acknowledgement in the country that perhaps Brexit isn't everything that it was cracked up to be. That doesn't mean reversing the Brexit decision, but it perhaps does mean thinking about a better form of economic partnership with the UK that imposes less of a cost on the country in terms of living standards and economic prosperity.
Calvin, does Boris Johnson even believe in Brexit? I mean, before the referendum, and you'll know this full well, he wrote 2 different articles, one pro-Brexit and one anti-Brexit. He was just waiting to see what the result was going to be, wasn't he?
I mean, I'm not going to sit here and discuss what someone believes or not because I can't see inside his head, but I would say that any right-minded individual would put together the arguments for and against something before they jump on board and take a serious campaign like that forward. I think that was the right thing to do. But it's good that you've mentioned Brexit because this is all about Brexit. There are many, many Remain people that I would now call rejoin people that want to see us taken back into the EU, want to undermine Brexit, and would love to see the back of Boris Johnson. There's a cohort of parliamentarians across the spectrum that would love to see him go, and that's why there's been such a sustained attack against him. And I mean, I think it's a nonsense to sit there and say that all other countries have bounced back faster than the UK. The UK has bounced back pretty fast, but to suggest that if it's slightly delayed, that's because of Brexit, again, that is the Ramona argument that everything's negative in this country is because of Brexit. Nothing to do with us spending borrowing £300 billion to cover furlough and these kinds of lockdown tactics, is it? You know, draconian measures that were brought in for the pandemic have had a larger impact on our economic situation than Brexit has to date. So I think that should be taken into consideration before everyone points the finger at Brexit. It's just an easy scapegoat that I'm getting tired of, and I think a lot of the British public are. And we want Brexit to be a success, so it's important that it's talked about in a positive way, as much as the left-wing media tend to peddle the negative stance on everything.
Sure. OK, I'm just quoting official figures, and those other major industrialised countries that have shown faster recovery, they also, Calvin, did implement those drastic measures that you're talking about.
Did they also borrow £300 billion? Did they also implement furlough schemes? Did they also implement 3 major lockdowns in their countries for a significant amount of time?
I think some of them actually may have had more expensive furlough schemes. They may have paid out actually more. But OK, look, we'll leave that there because the recovery is happening. It just may not be happening as fast, although, of course, you disagree. Let's get down to what may be the crux of the matter as far as Boris Johnson, the human being, is concerned. And that's his character. And Calvin, you started our discussion here by talking about the fact that you're sick and tired of people saying that he's a liar, etc., etc. The thing is, if you follow British politics, you'll have seen Boris Johnson's history. And I just want to help the viewer along and just quote 2 people who you could say are part of his core constituency, to the centre-right of British politics. Max Hastings used to be the editor of the Daily Telegraph when Boris Johnson was a journalist there. And he wrote a piece just before Johnson became Prime Minister in 2019. And this is a bit of a quote from the article. He says, "He is unfit for national office because it seems he cares for no interest save his own fame and gratification. His premiership will almost certainly reveal a contempt for rules, precedent, order and stability. Dignity still matters in public office, and Johnson will never have it. Yet his graver vice is cowardice." And he continues, Max Hastings, he ends by saying, "Like many showy personalities, he is of weak character. He would not recognise the truth, whether about his private or political life, if confronted by it in an identity parade." Calvin, that's Max Hastings. You can't say he's not on the centre-right of British politics. He knows, and he has known Boris Johnson for decades.
Indeed, but what I will say is please don't misquote me. When I said I was sick and tired, I said I was sick and tired of left-wing media blaming Brexit for everything. At the start of the interview, I said I don't think people are... I didn't think that the reason that the British public were fed up of Boris Johnson was because he is a liar. I don't think people expected him to have integrity. That's a very different stance. That's not me saying he does have integrity. That's me saying I don't think people expected that of him. What they expected of Boris Johnson was for him to get Brexit done. He does have a track record of being a bit of a rebel, a bit of a bad boy, and at times skirting around the truth. He does have that reputation, and I've never denied that. But what I'm saying here is that people wanted him to do a job. He got that job done, and I don't think that we can speak on behalf of the British people in the way that has been done in this programme so far and suggest that actually people are tired of him now because of the hypocrisy or because of the lie, unless we put that to the polls. And we've had a poll very recently. The only poll that matters is the election, and the Conservatives did quite well.
Yeah, they certainly did better than many people were expecting, and thanks for putting the record straight if I misquoted you. Patrick, it's an easy one for you. OK, it's Rory Stewart, former Tory MP who was defeated by Boris Johnson in the leadership challenge before Johnson became Prime Minister. And here's the quote. "Johnson is the most accomplished liar in public life, perhaps the best liar ever to serve as Prime Minister. He has mastered the use of error, omission, exaggeration, equivocation and flat denial. He is equally adept at the ironic jest, the fib and the grand lie, the weasel word and the half-truth, the hyperbolic lie, the obvious lie and the bullshit lie." OK, excuse me, but that's a direct quote. I don't know what to say about that. People who know Boris Johnson are saying these things about him. Patrick. OK, I think we may have lost connection with Patrick. OK, so Chris, the overall question to you and your area of expertise, when you look at Boris Johnson, do you see a good leader or a bad leader in terms of the quality that the best leaders need?
In terms of the behaviour that Boris has demonstrated, from the pure leadership perspective, rather than any ability to get things done politically, it is an appalling example of leadership. And if I had been confronted with a manager in any of the organisations I have worked with who had demonstrated behaviour like that, lack of integrity, lying to people, dissembling and all of these things, they would have been out. However, the British people in terms of politicians are more generous. And as has been said, the British people viewed Boris as a lovable rogue who might well get Brexit done. Yes, at that point in time, that was the judgment. But since then, it's become more personal. A lovable rogue has turned into somebody who became a hypocrite, who lost his integrity when they had to go through COVID and they stuck to the rules and he didn't. quoting the two examples I gave of your relatives dying without you being able to see them whilst they were partying, and Her Majesty the Queen at the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral. That took it up a gear from a tolerable, lovable rogue to somebody who was a hypocrite, who many of the British people despise, but because there isn't an alternative, they might just have to tolerate and bite their teeth in the next election.
Gentlemen, thank you so much indeed for taking part in today's The Newsmakers, where we've been discussing the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Calvin, Patrick, Chris, take care. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you for watching. You can follow us on Twitter at @the_Newsmakers. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Take care. Goodbye.